He is with me, and I would advise you to step back.
Pretend to be my Duchess.
But there is one condition.
Someone is watching this room. 3 men. They arrived within the last hour. They are not guests.
She had exactly 30 seconds to decide whether to betray a stranger or watch the most powerful duke in England be publicly destroyed. Seraphina Vale chose neither. She stepped between them, looked the ruthless Duke of Ravensworth directly in the eyes, and lied through her teeth. What she didn't expect was the way his hand found her waist in the next breath, or the dangerous warmth in his voice when he whispered against her ear, "Pretend to be my Duchess, but there is one condition." The ballroom went still, and something inside her, something she had locked away a very long time ago, cracked open. Welcome to Duke Royal Tales, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The invitation had been a mistake. Seraphina knew at the moment she stepped through the gilded doors of Ashworth Palace and felt 300 pairs of eyes measure her worth in the span of a single breath. She was not supposed to be here. She was a junior archivist for the Royal Historical Society, not nobility, not a duchess, not anyone who belonged beneath these chandeliers dripping with Viennese crystal. She had come because her supervisor, Lord Fenton, had pressed her credentials card into her hand and told her the evening's royal gala contained documents she was authorized to verify. Nothing more. But Lord Fenton had not warned her about the Duke. Maximilian Ravensworth stood near the far end of the grand ballroom, and the crowd moved around him the way water moves around stone. Not out of politeness, but out of instinct. He was tall enough that she noticed him before she noticed anything else. Dark hair, a jaw that looked carved from something harder than marble, the kind of stillness in his bearing that came not from calm but from absolute control. He was speaking to no one, holding a glass of something dark, and watching the room with the particular expression of a man who owned everything in it and found it all deeply tedious. Seraphina pulled her gaze away. She had work to do. She found the documents in the east antechamber, right where the palace secretary had indicated. A leather portfolio containing 3 royal land deeds requiring verification of royal seal authenticity before tomorrow's parliamentary session. Simple work. 10 minutes, perhaps 15, and she could leave this glittering world and return to her books. She had just unclasped the portfolio when the door opened behind her. "You are in the wrong room." The voice was deep, deliberate. It moved through the air the way a storm moves through a valley, unhurried and absolute. Seraphina turned. The Duke of Ravensworth stood in the doorway, and up close he was considerably more unsettling than from across a ballroom. His eyes were the color of storm-dark water, a gray so intense it read almost violet in the lamplight. They dropped to the portfolio in her hands with the precision of a man who missed nothing. "I am in the correct room, actually." She kept her voice even. "I am here on behalf of the Royal Historical Society to verify the seals on these deeds before..." "Close the portfolio." He stepped inside and shut the door. Now, the authority in it was not something she could simply dismiss. She closed the portfolio. "Someone is watching this room," he said, moving to the window and scanning the courtyard below without touching the curtain. 3 men. They arrived within the last hour. They are not guests. I don't understand what that has to do with me. It has everything to do with you." He turned, and something shifted in his expression, not softening, not warmth, but the particular recalibration of a man rewriting his strategy mid-motion. His eyes moved over her quickly, the ivory gown, the dark curls pinned at her neck, the intelligence in her face that she hadn't bothered to conceal. "What is your name?" "Seraphina Vale." "Are you married, Miss Vale?" The question was so abrupt that she blinked. "No." "Engaged?" "No." "Good." He crossed the room toward her with the unhurried certainty of someone who had never once been told no and had not begun to anticipate it now. "Then you are going to do something for me." She took a step back. He stopped, and to his credit, the only credit she would give him that evening, he did not come closer. "I am not going to do anything until you explain what is happening," she said. He was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then he told her. The documents in the portfolio she was holding were not simply historical deeds. They contained a codicil, a hidden amendment buried in archival language that, if presented tomorrow before Parliament, would strip his family's northern estates of their royal charter and transfer them to the crown. Someone had planted it in the archive. Someone who knew she would be here tonight, who would handle the documents, who would verify the seals and unwittingly authenticate a forgery as legitimate royal history. If those documents were submitted tomorrow bearing her professional credentials and the society's seal, the entire case would rest on her testimony. She had been used as a pawn before she'd ever known the game was being played. "Who?" she asked. "That is what I intend to discover." His jaw tightened. "But not tonight. Tonight, I need you to walk back into that ballroom beside me. I need those men watching this room to see that the woman handling those documents is not a random archivist. She is someone under my protection, someone they would be very foolish to move against." Seraphina stared at him. "You want me to pretend to be my Duchess?" The words came without apology. "My betrothed, at minimum. Someone whose position is unassailable." He paused. "There is one condition." She waited. "You do not speak unless I speak to you first. Not tonight. Not until I understand who in that room is involved." His eyes held hers. "Can you do that?" It was the wrong question. She had spent her entire career in rooms full of people who expected her to be quiet, to be small, to be invisible. She was very, very good at it. But she had never chosen it willingly, and something in the way he asked, not demanding, not dismissive, but asking, genuinely asking, made her answer differently than she might have. "I can," she said, "but I want the portfolio back tonight. Whatever is in those documents belongs in proper custody." Something moved behind his eyes. Surprise, she thought. Then something else. "Agreed," he said. He offered his arm. She took it, and they walked back into the light. The effect was immediate. 300 people noticed the Duke of Ravensworth return to the ballroom. That was expected. What was not expected was the woman on his arm. No one recognized her. That made it worse. The speculation began before they had crossed the threshold, a hum of whispered questions that Seraphina felt against her skin like heat. Maximilian did not acknowledge it. He moved through the crowd with the same controlled ease he carried everywhere, and he kept her close. Not pressed against him, not possessive in the theatrical way some men perform possession, but present, steady. A hand at her back that said she is with me in a language everyone in the room understood. "Lady Pemberton," he said, pausing before a woman in emerald silk. "How lovely to see you again." The woman's eyes found Seraphina with surgical precision. "And who is this?" "Someone very dear to me," he said. Simple, unelaborated. The kind of answer that created more questions than it answered, and was designed to do exactly that. Seraphina smiled the smile she had learned from years of presenting research to skeptical professors. Gracious, self-possessed, entirely opaque. They moved on. He leaned slightly toward her. "You are better at this than I expected. I spent 3 years working in a duke's private archive," she said quietly. "I have attended enough of these gatherings to know the performance." He said nothing for a moment. "Whose archive?" "The late Duke of Harcastle." A pause so brief she almost missed it. "You knew Harcastle?" "I knew his library. He was not particularly interested in me." Another pause. And this time, when she glanced up, the expression on his face was not the cool calculation of earlier. It was something she could not immediately name. Not interested, exactly. More like recognition. The particular look of a man who has encountered something unexpected in a place he thought he already understood. She looked away before she could examine it further. By midnight, she had been introduced to 7 lords, 2 foreign envoys, 1 duchess who inspected her with magnificent contempt, and a man named Lord Caldwell who had been smiling at her for 20 minutes with the particular brightness of someone attempting to gather information while appearing merely charming. Maximilian had not left her side. She noticed it in the way one notices a source of warmth, not directly, not consciously, until it shifts. It shifted when Caldwell extended his hand. "I don't believe we've been introduced," he said, directing the words at her rather than at Maximilian. "I'm a great admirer of the Royal Historical Society's work. Perhaps you might tell me which branch you represent?" The question was precise. Too precise. He already knew she was from the Society, which meant he knew she had been in that antechamber, which meant Maximilian's hand moved to the small of her back, the lightest pressure. A warning wrapped in the language of intimacy. "She is occupied," he said, his voice entirely pleasant. "As am I. Excuse us, Caldwell." He guided her away and did not stop walking until they reached the terrace doors. Outside, the autumn air was cool and immediate. She breathed it in. "Caldwell," she said. "Yes." "He knew I was from the Society." "Yes." His jaw was tight. "He is the third person tonight who has looked at you like you are a problem they need to resolve." He turned to face her, and in the lower light of the terrace lanterns, the storm gray of his eyes was more pronounced. "You did well there. I did what you asked. You did more than that." He said it carefully, like a man who did not give compliments freely and was aware of the weight of this one. "You noticed Caldwell before I pointed him out." She had. She hadn't mentioned it because he had not yet spoken to her. Following his own condition, absurd as it had seemed. She told him so. Something shifted in his expression again. "You followed my instruction. You gave me a reason for it. I respect the reasons." He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the darkened palace gardens. Then he said quietly, "The condition I gave you, the instruction not to speak first." "Yes?" "I gave it because I needed to control the information flowing out of that room, not because I assumed you had nothing worth saying." He paused. "I should have explained that." She stared at him. The Duke of Ravensworth, standing on a cold terrace at midnight, explaining himself to an archivist he had met 45 minutes ago. "You didn't have to tell me that," she said. "No," he agreed. "But you deserve to know the reason was tactical, not personal." His eyes came back to hers. "I want you to understand the difference." Seraphina Vale had spent a great many years being overlooked, being reduced to her function, to her usefulness as a researcher, a verifier, a pair of hands that could be placed where needed and thanked with professional brevity. She had made peace with it. She had built a life inside it. She was not prepared for a man who looked at her and saw something worth explaining himself to. She turned back toward the doors. "We should go back inside before someone notices we've been out here long enough for it to mean something." "It already means something," he said, and followed her in. The carriage ride back was not something she had planned for. She had planned to leave at midnight, call a cab, return to her apartment in the older part of the city, with the portfolio secured under her arm, and a thorough account to write for her supervisor in the morning. What she had not planned for was Lord Caldwell's man following her to the coat room, or Maximilian appearing silently behind her, and saying, in the most ordinary voice imaginable, "My carriage is outside. You will take it. I have my own arrangements. Your own arrangements are being watched." His voice was low. "The man by the east corridor has been tracking your movements for the last 20 minutes. If you leave alone, you will be followed." She wanted to argue. The look in his eyes stopped her. Not fear. He did not appear to feel fear the way ordinary people did, but certainty. The absolute, bone-deep certainty of a man who had assessed a situation and arrived at its conclusion before anyone else had finished forming the question. She took the carriage. Inside, the leather was cold and dark and smelled faintly of cedar. He sat across from her, not beside her, and the portfolio rested on the seat between them like a third presence. "You said someone planted the codicil," she said. "Yes, someone with access to the archive. Someone with access to the archive, and knowledge of tonight's schedule, and enough influence to place a document in the verification queue without triggering a review." He was watching her carefully. "Which means they are either inside the society, or they have leverage over someone who is." Seraphina thought of her supervisor, Lord Fenton, with his nervous hands and his too bright smile when he'd pressed the credentials card into her palm. "Go tonight, Miss Vale. You specifically are authorized." She said nothing, but Maximilian had been watching her face. "You are thinking of someone. I am thinking about the fact that I was specifically chosen for tonight's verification." She met his eyes. "My supervisor told me I was authorized, not that I had been assigned, not that I was next on the rotation. He said I was authorized specifically." Silence. "Fenton," he said, "I don't know that he—" "No, but we need to." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, and in the low light of the moving carriage he looked like something painted by a Renaissance master, all shadow and bone and absolute intensity. "Miss Vale, what I am about to ask you will require more than one evening." She felt the shift before he finished the sentence. "The forgery will take time to trace. The network behind it will take longer. If I move too quickly, they destroy the evidence. If I move openly, they scatter." He held her gaze. "I need someone inside the society who can monitor what moves through the archive. Someone they will not suspect because they already used her, because her involvement is already documented. You want me to keep pretending," she said slowly. "I want you to keep working, in your own role, with me beside you in the spaces where it is necessary." He paused. "The pretense gives you cover. It gives them a reason to dismiss you as compromised, as a woman who got personally entangled with the Duke and therefore cannot be objective. They will underestimate you." She looked at him. "And in return?" "In return, I will tell you everything I know about who built this trap. I will give you the full picture, not fragments." Something crossed his face. A brief, unguarded honesty that surprised her more than anything else had tonight. "And I will ensure no harm comes to you from the part you have already played." The carriage slowed. Outside, the familiar street lamps of her neighborhood flickered past the window. "How long?" she asked. "Until I have enough to take to Parliament." "That could be weeks." "Yes." Seraphina looked down at the portfolio in her lap, at the false seals, at the careful, patient architecture of a trap laid by someone who had anticipated every piece of this except for her. "I want full disclosure," she said. "Everything you find, I find. I am not a tool you use and then thank me with a banknote." "No," he said quietly, "you are not. And I want to be the one who presents the evidence to Parliament, my name on the findings." A beat, then, agreed. She looked up. He was watching her with that same unnameable expression, the one she had first caught on his face in the ballroom and had not yet been able to identify. It was not admiration, exactly. It was something more careful than admiration. Something that took its time. "We begin tomorrow," she said. The carriage stopped. His footman opened the door. She stepped out into the cold, the portfolio under her arm, and did not look back. She did not need to. She could feel him watching her walk to her door. 3 days passed before she saw him again. She had expected him sooner, had half braced for it. But the days moved with their ordinary rhythm, and Maximilian Ravensworth did not appear. She went to the archive. She worked. She watched Lord Fenton with a new and careful attention, noting the small things she had previously dismissed. How he left his office unlocked at odd hours, how his handwriting appeared on external correspondence that should have required her countersignature, how he looked at her across the reading room with something that was not quite guilt and not quite fear, but lived in the neighborhood of both. On the 4th morning, a note appeared on her desk. No name, no seal. In handwriting she was beginning to recognize, 2nd floor reading room, 11 o'clock, come alone. She burned the note and went. He was already there when she arrived, standing at the window with his back to the door in the same posture he'd held at the palace, watching the street below with that still, total attention. He turned when she entered, and for a brief moment she saw something on his face that disappeared before she could name it. Relief, perhaps. Something adjacent to relief. "You came," he said. "You asked," she said. "I told you I respect reasons." A pause. Then, and she had not expected this, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile exactly, the ghost of one. The brief, reluctant acknowledgement of something found amusing by a man who had very nearly forgotten what that felt like. "Fenton met with Caldwell 2 nights ago," he said. "My men tracked them to a private club on Varon Street. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. He crossed the room and placed a folded paper on the reading table. These are the names Fenton has been in contact with over the past 6 weeks. 3 of them appear in the archive's visitor log under permissions he authorized personally. Seraphina unfolded the paper. She read it. Her stomach dropped. Horcastle, she said. The name came out quiet. The late Duke's nephew, currently contesting the estate settlement. His voice was even. You worked in Harcastle's archive for 3 years. I did. She stared at the name. He knows me. He knows you are credible. He knows your verification would not be questioned. Maximilian's voice was careful. He chose you because he trusted your reputation to do his work for him. The clarity of it was almost admirable. Almost. She folded the paper back with precise, deliberate movements. He miscalculated, she said. He did. Maximilian was watching her again. Miss Vale, the codicil, she said. I need to see the original deed it was supposedly amending. If the amendment was forged, the original will have no corresponding entry in the parliamentary record. I can find that. I know. He moved closer, and she did not step back this time. I have already pulled the parliamentary register. The entry does not exist, but I need a third party to confirm it. Someone whose professional testimony carries independent weight. Me. You. She looked up at him. He was closer than she had realized, close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the particular set of his jaw when he was thinking hard about something. Close enough that the cedar and something else scent of him was present in the air between them. You have already done more than I asked of you, he said, and his voice was quieter now, stripped of its usual authority, speaking not as a duke to a useful civilian but as something else. Something without a clean title. I want you to know that. You don't need to. I am aware that I don't need to. He did not look away. I want to. There is a difference, as someone once reminded me. She felt heat move up her throat. She looked back down at the papers. I will start on the parliamentary record today, she said. Give me 48 hours. You have them. A pause. I will be at the Whitmore dinner tomorrow evening. You will be there as my guest. She blinked. I thought we agreed the pretense was only when necessary. Lord Harcastle's nephew will also be at the Whitmore dinner. Something cold moved through his eyes. I want him to see you beside me before he knows what you found. She understood. Let him think she was compromised. Let him relax. Let him believe the archivist he'd used had become tangled up in something personal and lost her objectivity. What time? She asked. 8 o'clock. I will send a car. She nodded. I gathered the papers, started for the door. Seraphina. She stopped. It was the first time he had used her given name. He had not asked permission, and she had not invited it, and yet it landed entirely without presumption, as though the name itself had been waiting for someone to say it correctly, and had decided quietly that this counted. She turned. Be careful with Fenton tomorrow, he said. Smile at him the way you always do. Don't change anything. I know how to manage myself, Your Grace. Yes. His eyes held hers for one long, still moment. I know. I am reminding myself, not you. She walked out. And this time she let herself feel the warmth that followed her down the stairs. The Whitmore dinner was held in a house that made Ashworth Palace look understated. Lady Whitmore collected beautiful things, art, furniture, people, and arranged them with the eye of someone who understood that the most important thing a beautiful object could do was make other beautiful objects look lesser by comparison. Seraphina arrived in a gown borrowed from her colleague Eloise, deep blue silk with a low back and sleeves that fell off the shoulder, and felt the evening's social architecture assess and recalibrate the moment she walked in. Maximilian was already inside. He saw her from across the entrance hall, and the change in him was small but precise. A slight stillness, a shift in attention, the way a compass needle finds north. He crossed to her before anyone else could reach her. You look. He stopped, started again. The blue suits you. Thank you for not finishing your first sentence, she said. Something moved in his face. It was a compliment. I know. It surprised you, and you caught yourself being surprised, and that is somehow more flattering than the compliment would have been. He stared at her for a moment. Then, completely without warning, he laughed. It was brief. It was quiet. It completely transformed him. She felt it move through her chest like a chord struck on a string she had forgotten she had. "Come," he said, and offered his arm. Hardcastle's nephew was by the east fireplace. She took his arm and they went to work. The nephew's name was Edmund Hardcastle. He was 40, lean, with the kind of smile that was assembled rather than genuine, each piece correctly placed without the underlying warmth that gave a smile its honesty. He saw Seraphina and held very still for exactly 1 second before recovering. "Miss Vale." He extended his hand. "What a surprise! I had not realized you were acquainted with Ravensworth." "We met recently," she said, "at Ashworth Palace." "Ah." His eyes moved between them, reading the tableau. Reading her position at Maximilian's side, the familiarity of it, the suggestion of something established and personal rather than professional. "I hope your work with the Society is going well." "Very well," she said pleasantly. "I have been reviewing the Parliamentary deed registers this week, actually. Fascinating material." She felt Maximilian's hand move fractionally at her back, a tiny, warm pressure. Perfect. Edmund's smile did not change, but his eyes did. "Wonderful," he said. "Historical record-keeping is so important, isn't it?" she agreed. They moved on 20 minutes later, circling the room through the choreography of a formal dinner, and Maximilian did not speak until they reached a relatively quiet stretch of corridor near the library. "He is rattled," he said quietly. "Yes. You mentioned the registers deliberately. You told me not to speak first," she said. "You didn't say anything about what to say when I did speak." He looked at her sideways, and this time the expression was completely unguarded, something between exasperation and something warmer than exasperation, something that didn't have a formal name but lived in close proximity to admiration, and was working its way steadily towards something else. "I am beginning to think," he said slowly, "that giving you conditions was the worst tactical error I have made in recent memory." "You said you respected the reasons," she reminded him. "I gave you one. You gave me a reason to reconsider every assumption I arrived here with tonight." She looked at him. The corridor was quiet and lit by a single wall lamp. Outside, through the tall window at the end of the hall, the city moved in its ordinary way. Traffic, lamplight, the distant sound of rain beginning against glass. Inside, this small, still space felt sealed from all of that. "Maximilian," she said, testing the name the way he had tested hers, watching his face for the same response. She got it. The same small, precise stillness. The same compass needle shift. "What did you find in the registers?" he asked, and his voice was careful now, careful in the way of a man who is exerting effort to stay on the subject at hand. "The entry doesn't exist," she said. "Not in the register, not in the cross-index, not in the supplementary ledger. Whoever built the forged codicil built it entirely without a corresponding parliamentary trace. It cannot be authenticated." She held his gaze. "It is over. As far as the legal threat to your estate is concerned, the forgery is probably fraudulent." Silence. "You found that in 48 hours, he said. "I found it at 26. He exhaled. A controlled, quiet breath that contained, she thought, something very much like relief. The genuine kind, the kind that lives under the sternum and has nowhere dignified to go. "Then tomorrow," he said, "we will take it to the Parliamentary Committee." "Together," she said. "Together," he agreed. And then, because the corridor was quiet and the rain was building, and she was standing very close to a man who had been looking at her for 4 days with the patient attention of someone who had found something irreplaceable and was taking great care not to startle it, she leaned up and pressed her lips to his jaw. Brief, light, a breath of contact. He went entirely still. She stepped back. For appearances, she said, and the steadiness of her voice cost her something. "We are alone in a corridor," he said. "There is no one to perform for." She held his gaze. "I know." Something broke open in his expression, not dramatically, not with declaration, but with the quiet totality of a door swung wide in the dark, letting in all the light at once. His hand came up to her face, the backs of his fingers brushing her cheekbone with a restraint that was its own kind of intensity. "Seraphina," he said, quietly, completely. "Tomorrow," she said softly. "We go to Parliament tomorrow. Let's not complain tonight before then." His hand dropped. He stepped back. His jaw was tight with the effort of it. "Tomorrow," he agreed. She turned and walked back toward the sound of the dinner party, and her heart was hammering so hard that it took her until she reached the doorway to remember how to arrange her face into something that resembled calm. Behind her, she heard him follow, steady, close, like a man who had stopped pretending he wasn't exactly where he wanted to be. The Parliamentary Committee met at 9 o'clock in the morning in a room that smelled of old paper and older certainties. A wood-paneled chamber on the second floor of the Four Lords building where men had been making consequential decisions for 3 centuries and expected to continue doing so without interruption from archivists in borrowed silk gowns. Seraphina had gone home and changed. She wore her own clothes to Parliament, a deep charcoal wool dress with a high collar and the small pearl earrings her mother had left her. Professional, correct. The clothes of a woman who had earned her place in this room by knowing more about what lived inside it than anyone who had ever governed it. Maximilian met her at the entrance. He looked at her, the whole of her, unhurried, and said nothing for a moment. "You changed," he said finally. "These are my real clothes," she said. Something shifted in his expression. "I know." A pause. "They suit you better." She felt warmth move through her chest and refused to let it show. "Shall we go in?" They went in. The committee consisted of 5 men, all older than 50, all accustomed to being the most important people in any given room. Lord Chairman Beaufort sat at the head of the table with the specific weight of a man who had exercised authority so long it had ceased to feel like effort and had become simply the way he occupied space. Maximilian presented the case with the same controlled precision he brought to everything, measured, documented, devastatingly clear. The original deed, the forged codicil, the parliamentary register with no corresponding entry. Each piece was placed before the committee in sequence, like a carefully built argument that had only one possible conclusion. Then he said, "The verification of the forgery was performed by Miss Seraphina Vale of the Royal Historical Society, whose professional credentials and findings I am now presenting to this committee." Beaufort looked at her, the look of a man who had not expected the archivist to be a woman, and was now doing rapid, slightly uncomfortable mathematics about what to do with that expectation. Seraphina stood. "Lord Chairman," she said, "Gentlemen, the codicil in question bears a parliamentary seal dated to the session of March 1889. I have cross-referenced every deed registered in that session against the supplementary ledgers, the cross-index, and the original committee minutes. This codicil does not appear in any of them." She laid her own documentation on the table, printed, organized, annotated in the careful hand of someone who had spent 3 years in a private archive and knew exactly how evidence needed to be presented to survive scrutiny. Furthermore, the handwriting characteristics of the codicil are inconsistent with the period's standard clerking hand. I have included a comparative analysis with 3 authenticated deeds from the same session. Silence. "You are saying the codicil is a fabrication," Beaufort said. "I am saying the codicil is a fabrication," she confirmed, "and I am prepared to testify to that finding under oath." The room was quiet for 10 seconds. Then Lord Harkisle's solicitor, seated against the far wall, pushed to his feet. "The Society's archivist is personally involved with the Duke of Ravensworth. Her objectivity, Maximilian said, and his voice could have frozen the Thames, is evidenced by 26 hours of independent research, 3 independent document analyses, and a findings report that will withstand any review this committee chooses to conduct." He let a pause go by. "Her personal associations are irrelevant to the quality of her scholarship. If you would like to impugn the findings, do so on the merits. I will wait." The solicitor sat down. Beaufort looked at his colleagues. Something passed between them. The wordless communication of men who have worked together long enough to conduct entire conversations in silence. "We will review the findings," Beaufort said. "The committee will communicate its determination within the week." Outside, the morning had turned sharp and bright. Autumn light came off the stone of the buildings at an angle that made everything look slightly more real than usual. Edge-lit, defined, the kind of clarity that arrived after a long stretch of weather had finally broken. Seraphina stood on the steps and breathed it in. Maximilian came to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him against the cold air. "They will confirm it," he said. "The evidence is airtight." "I know it is." She looked out at the street. "I built it to be." A pause. "Then you were extraordinary there." She turned to look at him. He was watching her with that expression again, the one she had been trying to name for 4 days, and had finally arrived at the correct word for somewhere between the borrowed silk gown and the parliamentary chamber. It was tender, careful, restrained, duke-shaped tenderness, worn by a man who was not accustomed to the feeling and was handling it with the precision he brought to everything. "You defended my objectivity in front of the committee," she said. "It needed defending." "You didn't have to." "Yes," he said quietly, "I did." She looked at him for a long moment. The morning traffic moved around them. A pigeon landed on the step below and departed with the disinterest of something that had seen a great many consequential things and remained unimpressed by all of them. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait for the committee's decision." He paused. "And I need to deal with Edmund Harkessel and Lord Fenton and Caldwell." His jaw tightened. "All of it will move quickly once the committee confirms the forgery. The evidence chain points to all three." He glanced at her. "You will be kept entirely separate from that process. I will not allow you to be further exposed to Maximilian." She said his name the way she had in the corridor the previous night, as a full stop, not a request. "I was the one they targeted. I was the one they used. If you move against them without me, you are making the same decision they made, treating me as an object that exists in relation to this case rather than a person who is part of it." He was very still. "I am not doing that," he said. But she could see, from the way his expression shifted, that he had been about to. Not from contempt, from protection. From the reflection of a man who had lived long enough in powerful spaces to know what they could do to people who were caught in the crossfire of other people's ambitions. "I know you're not doing it from dismissal," she said, softer now. "I know the difference, but you need to let me be part of what comes next. Not because I earned it, though I did, but because it is the right thing." He looked at her for a long moment. The morning light was direct and honest on his face, and in it he looked less like the untouchable, storm-eyed Duke of Ravensworth, and more like a man who was working out, slowly and with some difficulty, how to stop carrying everything alone. "All right," he said. She nodded. "Thank you." They stood together on the steps for another moment, neither moving. The city moved around them. "I owe you something," he said finally. "You owe me the full picture," she reminded him. "That was our agreement." It was. He turned to face her more directly. "But I owe you something beyond the agreement." A pause. "You asked me once what the condition was, the one I mentioned in the antechamber." She remembered. "There is one condition." She had assumed it was the silence instruction, the tactical request not to speak first. He had clarified that in the corridor. But there had been something in the way he'd said that night, something weighted, that she had filed away and not returned to until now. "Yes," she said. "What was it?" He held her gaze. "That if I asked you to pretend," he said, "I would not allow either of us to stop pretending and discover it had become real." A beat. That was the condition, the one I set for myself. Something moved behind his eyes. I failed it rather quickly. The honesty of it was so direct and so unguarded that she had no prepared response for it. She had prepared for almost everything else. For legal arguments, for archival disputes, for the social performance of the ballroom and the dinner table. She had not prepared for this. "When?" she asked. The word came out quieter than she intended. "The second day," he said, "when you told me you respected the reasons. No one has said that to me in longer than I can clearly remember." His jaw moved. "I spent the rest of that day reminding myself of the condition." "And the third day?" "The third day I stopped reminding myself." Seraphina looked at him. This careful, contained, storm-eyed man who had spent his entire life governing enormous things with enormous control and had apparently been entirely undone by an archivist who respected reasons. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Yes." "When I went home after the palace, after the first night, I sat for an hour at my kitchen table trying to reconstruct the last 2 hours of the evening in order to find the point at which I should have been more careful. She met his eyes steadily. I found it immediately. It was the moment I took your arm. After that, I was lost. Something in his face went very still. Not the controlled stillness of a man managing himself. The different, deeper stillness of a man who has stopped needing to. Seraphina, I am not finished. She held up a hand. I am telling you this so that we are equally exposed. You told me something true, and I want you to have something equally true in return. She let a breath go. I was lost from the moment you told me the reason for the condition. Not the condition itself, the reason. The fact that you separated your strategy from your intentions and handed me the difference. He closed the remaining space between them in one quiet, deliberate step. I am going to ask you something, he said, and his voice was low and precise and entirely stripped of all its ducal architecture. And I need you to answer based on what you want, not on what the situation has placed in front of you. Ask, she said, when this is over, when the committee has confirmed, when Harkessel is dealt with, when there is no case left to work and no reason left to be in the same room, do you want to continue not pretending? She looked at him. The morning light was still honest and direct. A cab rattled past. A woman with a pram negotiated the pavement below. The world continued its entirely ordinary business around the two of them. Yes, she said. He reached up and touched her face the way he had in the corridor the night before. The backs of his fingers, brief and careful and carrying more weight than most people's declarations. Then he lowered his hand and stepped back, and his expression was composed again, but different, settled, somehow, the way a room looks different after a window has been opened. Then let's finish it, he said. It moved quickly after that. The committee's determination came in 4 days, not 7. The forgery was confirmed. The codicil was struck from the record. The evidence chain Seraphina had built, and which Maximilian had extended with the surveillance documentation from his own investigators, was referred to the Crown Prosecutor's office with a recommendation for criminal proceedings. Lord Fenton resigned from the Royal Historical Society on the 5th day, before he could be asked to. Edmund Harkessel's solicitor was arrested on the 6th. Caldwell, who had been the architect of the original scheme, who had identified Seraphina as the tool and Fenton as the lever and Harkessel as the grievance to exploit, was brought in for questioning on the 7th morning, while Seraphina was in the archive completing her final verification report. She heard about it from Maximilian. He appeared in the reading room doorway at 10:30, and she looked up and read his face before he said a word. It's done, she said. It's done, he confirmed. She set down her pen. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The archive was quiet around them, the particular quiet of old rooms full of old paper, of histories that had been waiting patiently for people to stop being careless with them. Are you all right? He asked. She considered the question. She had spent 8 days inside a conspiracy built specifically around her credibility, her professional reputation, her careful years of building something trustworthy in a field that did not come easily to women who lacked the right last name or the right family connections. Someone had looked at everything she had built and decided it was a useful tool for their own purposes. And yet, I think so, she said. I think I am considerably more all right than the people who assumed I would be easy to use. He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her, the chair where, she now understood, their real acquaintance had begun, with a forged document between them and a city full of people watching. Seraphina, he said, I need to ask you something. You asked me something on the steps of Parliament 4 days ago, she reminded him. I told you yes. That answer has not changed. This is a different question. She raised her eyebrows. He reached into his coat pocket and set something on the table between them. It was small and dark, a ring box, old leather, the kind that had been opened and closed many times over many years. He left his hand on it for a moment before withdrawing. This belonged to my grandmother, he said, the last Duchess of Ravensworth. She was a formidable woman who ran the estate for 12 years while my grandfather was in Parliament and was generally considered to be the more capable of the two. He looked at her. She would have found you extraordinarily interesting, Seraphina stared at the box. "Maximilian, I am aware it has been 8 days," he said. "I am aware that 8 days is not the duration upon which most reasonable people build this particular decision. I am also aware that I have spent the last 8 days in closer proximity to you than I have been to anyone in a very long time, under conditions that required more honesty than most people exchange in years." His voice was careful. "So I would ask you to set aside the calendar and answer me based on what you actually know." She looked at him. The careful contained man, the storm-gray eyes, the jaw that gave nothing away unless you had learned over 8 increasingly extraordinary days exactly what to look for. She thought about what she actually knew. She knew that he told her reasons. She knew that when she'd set conditions, he'd met them without argument. She knew that he'd defended her before a parliamentary committee, not because it was tactically useful, but because it was correct. She knew that he'd looked at her in a corridor while the rain started and chose restraint when he did not have to, because he understood that some things needed to be earned and not taken. She reached across the table and opened the box. The ring was simple. A deep blue sapphire set in plain gold, surrounded by small diamonds that caught the archive's lamplight. It looked, she thought, like it had been chosen by someone with good taste and no interest in announcement for its own sake. "Yes," she said. He looked at her, really looked at her, the full weight of his attention. The undivided version she had come to understand was not something he gave casually or often, or to many. "Yes," she said again, more quietly. "I mean it." He took the ring from the box and came around the table to her, and she stood, and he held her hand with the same careful precision he brought to everything, and slid the ring onto her finger. "It fits." Of course it did. He did not let go of her hand. "I should tell you," he said, his voice low. "That's the condition I mentioned, the one I set for myself that first night." "Yes?" "I have decided," he said, "that it was the right condition for the wrong reason. I set it to protect myself." He looked down at her hand in his. "I should have set it to give you time to be certain." He looked up. "Are you certain?" "I was certain on the 3rd day," she said, "when you stopped reminding yourself." Something broke open in his face, clean and complete and entirely without pretense. All the careful architecture of the Duke of Ravensworth simply falling away and leaving the man underneath, who was looking at her the way she had looked at him when she thought he wasn't noticing, with the quiet, total attention of someone who has found something they had not known to look for. He pulled her close, and she let him, and the archive was very quiet around them, full of its patient histories and its old careful records of all the things that had mattered enough to preserve. The announcement appeared in the London Gazette 6 weeks later, brief, correct, and utterly without the social grandeur that a duke's betrothal traditionally commanded. Because the Duke of Ravensworth had, on the advice of his fiancée, decided that the announcement could speak for itself without assistance from embellishment. His Grace the Duke of Ravensworth announces his betrothal to Miss Seraphina Vale of the Royal Historical Society. The wedding will take place in the spring. London society received this information in the only way London society knew how to receive information that defied its expectations, with approximately 48 hours of furious, speculative, delighted gossip, after which it accepted the situation with the particular grace of a world that had always, ultimately respected people who did not ask its permission. Lord Fenton was quietly prosecuted and accepted a settlement that involved his permanent departure from professional archival work. Edmund Harcastle's legal challenges collapsed with the forgery. Caldwell stood trial and was convicted of fraud and conspiracy. Seraphina wrote a paper on the authentication of parliamentary seals that was published in the Society's journal and subsequently cited in 3 other academic contexts, because she was, as she had been before any of this, exceptionally good at her work. The wedding was held in April, when the estate grounds at Ravensworth were in first bloom, a modest ceremony attended by family, close friends, the members of the Parliamentary Committee who had confirmed her findings, and Lady Whitmore, who had declared the entire affair the most interesting social event of the decade and arrived in a hat of considerable ambition. Seraphina wore ivory, not borrowed, her own, chosen because she liked it and because it was hers. She had her mother's pearls. She had the sapphire ring. She walked down the aisle and found Maximilian at the end of it, standing with the stillness she had first noticed across a crowded ballroom and had since learned to read in all its variations. The controlled stillness, the waiting stillness, and this one, which was neither of those. This one was the stillness of a man who had simply stopped needing to manage anything, who was standing in the place he wanted to be and had nothing left to strategize about. He looked at her the way he always did now, without hiding it. She took his hand. The ceremony was brief and clear and honest, the way the best things were. Afterward, in the quieter part of the evening, she stood with him on the terrace of Ravensworth House and looked out at the garden in the last of the day's light. The same posture they had held on different terraces in different moments over the past months. The city exchanged now for parkland, and the cold autumn air exchanged for the softer warmth of spring. "I keep thinking about the condition," she said. "Which one?" "The one you set for yourself, the night we met." She glanced at him sideways. "The one you failed." He looked at her, and the ghost of that smile was back. The brief, reluctant, fully genuine one that had been the first real thing she'd seen on his face. "I fail very few things," he said. "You failed that one rather quickly," she reminded him. "Your word, the second day," he confirmed. "You told me you respected the reasons." That was all it took. He was quiet for a moment. "Then, you told me you respected the reasons. And then you followed an instruction I had no right to give you, and then you held me to the agreement when I tried to exclude you from its conclusion." He looked out at the garden. "No one has treated me like someone whose behavior needed to meet a standard in a very long time. Everyone either challenges me because they want something from me, or defers to me because they fear me." He turned to face her. "You did neither. You simply expected me to be worth your respect. And then you waited to find out if I was." She looked at him. Her husband. The careful man with the storm-gray eyes who had spent his life exercising authority and had been quietly undone by an archivist who required him to earn something. "Were you?" she asked. "Worth it?" He reached up and tucked a loose curl behind her ear, the gesture easy and certain now, no longer careful in the restraint of early days, just careful in the way of a man who has something precious and handles it accordingly. "Ask me in 40 years, he said. "I intend to keep working on it." She leaned her head against his shoulder. The garden stretched below them in the evening light, and the spring air was soft, and somewhere behind them inside the house people were laughing, and the music from the quartet had shifted to something slower and warmer. "Maximilian," she said. "Yes, I should tell you something. Tell me." "I looked for the point of no return," she said. "When I went home that first night and sat at my kitchen table, I tried to find the moment I should have been more careful." She felt him still slightly beneath her cheek. "I couldn't find it, because the moment I should have been more careful was the moment I walked through the doors of that ballroom. Everything after that was already inevitable." He was quiet for a moment. Then his arm came around her, and she felt him breathe. "The condition," he said very quietly, "was never going to hold." "No," she agreed, "because it was the wrong condition. What was the right one?" He pressed his lips to the top of her head, brief, warm, certain. "To tell you the truth early," he said, "and let you decide." She smiled. The garden light was fading now, soft and golden, and entirely unhurried. "You did eventually," she said. "Not early enough." "Early enough," she said. I decided yes. In the spring of the following year, a small notice appeared in the Royal Historical Society's internal bulletin, a single line, easily missed, wedged between a conference announcement and a grant result. Miss Seraphina Vale, now Her Grace the Duchess of Ravensworth, has been appointed as Honorary Curator of Parliamentary Historical Records, effective immediately. The appointment was made at the recommendation of the Parliamentary Committee on Document Authentication, whose members noted, in their supporting statement, that her work had, quote, demonstrated a standard of scholarship and integrity rarely encountered in any professional context, and never encountered in the circumstances she was asked to operate in. She is also, colleagues will be pleased to know, expecting the estate's heir in November. The Duke, by all accounts, has been entirely impossible about it in the most gratifying way. Thank you for watching Duke Royal Tales, besties. If this story moved your heart, The way Seraphina held her ground and Maximilian quietly fell apart trying not to. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories coming. Drop in the comments which moment made you fall for them. The terrace? The parliamentary chamber? Or the second day when she said she respected reasons? Another royal love story is waiting for you right now. Click and stay with us.